Welcome to Crossroad Connection. We're speaking out for those left unheard. My name is Art Vinwaldi. Last week we showed footage from a recent continuing education seminar featuring presentations from Lois DeMont and Dr. Barry Mintzes. Today you'll hear more about solitary confinement from Natalie Holbrook and Peter Martel from the American Friends Service Committee, Michigan Criminal Justice Program.
So real quickly, the American Friends Service Committee is a national and international Quaker organization doing different kinds of peace and social justice work around the world. In Michigan, we work on criminal justice reform issues and reform issues related to the state prison system. We hear from thousands of prisoners and their family members a year on all sorts of issues related to their conditions of confinement. The major issues that we work with people on are access to mental health care, and access to parole, in helping people navigate this very difficult system to get what they need in terms of healthcare, mental health care, and then the whole parole process. We also work a lot with people held in administrative segregation and security level 5 and 4, which I'll talk a little bit more about, because I think when we talk about solitary confinement in Michigan, we can't talk about it without talking about level 5 in particular, but also level 4, because people cycle in and out of those facilities a lot. There's over 2.3 million people in prisons in the United States, and another 7 million to 9 million actually now are under some form of correctional supervision. That means parole, probation, or some sort of tether or something where they're reporting to a law enforcement agent of some sort. There are huge racial disparities in the system. I'm going to talk more specifically about those in relation to administrative segregation in the state of Michigan towards the end of my presentation. But African Americans make up 30% of the U.S. population and 60% of the imprisoned population. So in Michigan, there are about 43,500 people in prison in Michigan right now. We had a huge decrease in the population. We peaked at 51,000 in 2009, and now are at 43,500, and it's been pretty static for the last few years. There are nearly 2,000 women in the system, and the rest are men. And when we talk about solitary confinement, we often, in our work, we're talking about men for the most part, but women also do end up in administrative segregation or 23 to 24-hour lockdown on a regular basis. There are 32 prisons in this state. 31 of them are men's prisons, and the rest are the single one is a female prison. We need another women's prison. That is a terrible situation right now. We have an overcrowded women's facility. So as of June 2013, 53.5% of Michigan's prison population was African American, 44% was white, and 2.5% was Native American, Asian American, or Latino. I just want to give you an overview of the Michigan Department of Corrections security levels. Levels 1 and levels 2 are the minimum security levels within the Department of Correction. They're the least restrictive custody levels. People have a lot of out-of-cell time. They have access to jobs. They have access to more programs, though not enough programs. Level 4 is more, it's a stricter form of security level. Almost all level 4 prisons are double bunked in this state. But people are being held in cell together for long periods of time through the day. So it's not a very humane form of treatment either to be in a level 4 unit and be in cell with a bunkie potentially for 20 hours a day, maybe 18 hours a day. They may be able to get jobs. They have access to some programs, historically not access to much. Level 5, and I focus on level 5 because right now I think level 5 is being used pretty much like administrative segregation within the Department of Corrections. It's a single bunk setting, so somebody's in a cell by themselves. They're in 22 to 23 hours a day. Most facilities feed everybody in their cells in the unit, so they don't come out to chow to eat together. They're fed in their cell. Like that food slat is a seg cell, so they're fed in cell by themselves also. They have minimal access to jobs unless they're a porter on the unit doing cleaning or something like that. and they're mostly not employed, and they don't have access to educational programs or volunteer-run programs for the most part. They're very, very tightly run facilities. Administrative segregation, there are different forms of administrative segregation within the Department of Corrections. There's temporary seg, and there's something that we oftentimes refer to as long-term segregation. And that, to us, to me, it's anything over 15 days, but the department, it's going to be over 30 days once they're out of temp seg, that somebody is going to be in an actual security placement that's administrative segregation. It's the most restrictive form of confinement within the Department of Corrections. People are in their cells 23 to 24 hours a day. They're let out 3 times a week for showers. There are no jobs. There are no jobs. There's no programming, and they are let outside, if they have this privilege, 5 times a week into a small, caged place to do exercise. And that privilege can be taken away. So people can have that, so they're held in cell 24 hours a day. On the weekends, they're not taken out that 1 hour a day, so they're in 24 hours a day. And if it's bad weather, and Pete may talk more about this, if it's bad weather or something, an officer could just be like, no, we're not taking you out today. So what lands a person in a higher security level? There's an overall classification process that I do not want to get into with you. It's very complicated. But when somebody goes to prison for 7 years or more on their minimum, they're automatically going to be in a level 4 institution. And level 4 institutions could have people there also who have behavioral issues or have not gotten along in the institution. So somebody who might end up in level 4, they actually could be involved in some activity that is not so good for them. If they have mental health issues, it might be more difficult for them to obey the rules there. And then they might end up in this cycle, and I call it this cycle of cycling in and out of level 5, add seg, level 5, add seg, because they're getting misconducts and can't adapt. People could end up in a higher security level because they need protection. Their overall past institutional history could be pretty abysmal. People are drug dealers in prison. They do some things that are sometimes bad. They may have predatory histories. So they could end up in a higher security classification because of their overall institutional history. The things that also land folks inside are fights, assaults, escapes or attempted escapes, new criminal convictions, which are usually assaultive in nature, possession of dangerous contraband, sexual assault, and then, again, the institutional file. It is difficult for a regular person who does not have any mental health problems or issues or cognitive issues to follow the rules of an institution. If you have an impairment of any sort, it is even more difficult to follow those rules. And so there's a whole major misconduct system, and people get tickets, and that lands them in higher security levels if they accrue enough tickets. I think that there have been some changes to the way that the department tries to identify people with mental illness, and then what they're doing in terms of keeping some people safe from themselves and safe from other people, from harming other people. But it is by no means perfect. It's a terrible place for anybody with a serious and persistent mental illness to live, is prison. It's not where somebody should live. So why these high security prisons matter and ADSEG, the inhumanity of holding somebody in segregation for 24 hours a day or 23 hours, holding somebody by themselves for that long, that in and of itself is wrong. But when somebody is in a higher security prison, it also impedes on their overall access to freedom. Nobody, for the most part, is ever going to be paroled to the streets from an administrative segregation cell. It's just not going to happen. For the most part, nobody's ever going to be paroled from level 5 to the streets. So what happens is people discharge. They might max out of a high security prison, and that means somebody's coming back to the community, probably not with any help from the state or any help from anybody at all. Maybe sometimes they might fit into a mental health program within parole and probation, but for the most part, not. And it's not okay to max people to the streets from high security prisons. Imagine your every movement being monitored and you being told what to do all day long, every day, and then you end up on the street and all by yourself if you don't have family there to help you. So we know that being locked in a cell by yourself is very difficult for people with serious and persistent mental illness. It's difficult for somebody who doesn't have serious and persistent mental illness. At times it might actually bring out some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder or something in somebody who doesn't have anything going on. So it's not a place where we should be holding people. Something that we have been focusing on in our work a lot is that higher security prisons hold a disproportionate rate of more people of color. So there are, in particularly African American men, and we have been doing a pretty intensive study on the rates that we are being, in some way, shapes, and forms, more punitive towards African American people in the prison system. And we know that this system is, there's structural racism fueling our criminal justice system. It happens. It's what's going on. And we would say that once you get into the system, that even gets, it is even more insidious. So these are some of the racial disparities that we have been discovering in our work. And the reason we started looking into this more closely is because we get letters from people. And we were noticing more and more that there were many, many African American people writing to us. And then on top of it, we monitor the census data for the Department of Corrections. And we found it befuddling that Baraga Maximum Correctional Facility, which is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is a very white community, had about 78% African American people up in that particular prison. We see that overall racial distribution for levels 4, 5, and ADSEG, it's 62% African American and 36% white. And then when you get even higher in level, the race distribution in administrative segregation is 70% African American and 28% white, with 2% other. And then when you look at the race among people who are cycling in and out, so we have data from 4 points in time over 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. And we see that some of these people are staying in level 4 and level 5, and the people that bounce back into ADSEG the most, 78% African American. Of all the data that we have, and it's about 16,000 people, right, over the 4 years, 2,099 of those people were past their earliest release dates. And you see what security levels they were in. So general population level 4 was a 40% of the folks were passed, and then general population level 5, 16%, 20% in ADSEG, and then 23% other special units. So that's the mental health units that are restrictive also. They're not all mental health units. It could be other units too. But the thing that I keep coming back to is that we often, I mean, even in the Department of Corrections right now, we know that Director Hines is very interested in spending a lot of money on reentry and services for people in level 1 and level 2, and for folks who are doing very short time, like 2-year stints. But these complicated cases, level 4, level 5, and ADSEG folks, if we're concerned about people with severe and persistent mental illness, if we're concerned about being more punitive in nature in the system, if we want to really eradicate structural racism in the Department of Corrections, which I don't know if folks want to do that, but I do, then it's really important for us to pay attention to these hard cases. And level 4, level 5, and ADSEG are the hard cases. They're the most complicated cases, and these are the folks that we're throwing away. It's easy to just throw them there because we don't pay attention. They're invisible, but they are the people that need super complex social services and networks for when they come back to the community.
At Crossroad Bible Institute, we are committed to helping people in prison develop relationships with Jesus Christ. By correcting Bible study lessons and writing letters of encouragement, CBI instructors participate in this ministry in a safe and secure way. For more information or to sign up to become a CBI instructor, please visit us at cbi.fm on the web.
So I've been working with Natalie at AFSC since 2005. Prior to that, I was locked up here in Michigan from
2010.
2010. Yeah. 2015 already. So from 1994 through 2008, I was locked up. And when I first got locked up, I was still a pretty young guy. It was a long time ago. I tried to escape, didn't make it, and then I went to SEG. So for the first, say, 15 or maybe 30 days of your time in segregation, and they've got a pretty good model over here. The first 15, 30 days, pretty typically, you're there as punishment for a misconduct ticket. So mine, it was an escape ticket, and the most that they could give me on that escape ticket was 30 days, which isn't horrible. You can do it, but it's 30 days, and it seems reasonable compared to what's going on. After you do the 30 days, what happens then is the administration right at the facility, the Security Classification Committee, then they make an administrative decision to put you in administrative segregation, or what we've been calling ADSEG. So ADSEG, there's no limit on it. It's indefinite. And it looks very, very much like that detention or that punitive seg that we talked about. You're probably still going to be in the same cell. There might be a really, really small amount of yard that you'll get that the people in detention wouldn't get, but it's really, really difficult to tell who's in administrative segregation and who's in punitive segregation. The reason that we've got the differences in the titles is because of court rulings in the past about punishing people, and you can only punish people so much. So then the Department of Corrections said, okay, but we're not punishing them. It's just an administrative decision now. So there was no more problem with that. So the first 30 days, and then after that, I did, I guess it would be like 9 years and 11 months, because the punitive part of it was 30 days, and then overall I did 10 years. So administrative segregation goes on and on and on. We don't do quite as much long-term seg in Michigan as we used to. It seems like I was unfortunately in at the really, really long time, because there were quite a few of us who were doing really long stints. I mean, I had 10 years in, and that was a pretty long chunk, but I had friends who ended up doing 14 and 17 years in segregation. We don't have that too much right now. There's a few people who are still in segregation that were probably in segregation when I started it in 1995, but overall, so the data that we've collected, over the 4 years that we've seen, there's only 67 people who have been in administrative segregation over those 4 years. And probably when Natalie first started studying this stuff, it's how I got to know Natalie in the first place. When I was in segregation, she was studying at AFSC, and she got in touch with a lot of us and sent out surveys, and it's how her and I met and did some work on segregation together. But when she was studying it years ago, 2005, 6, there were many more people who were doing longer than 4 years in seg. So we've made improvements as far as duration goes, but the problem is we've still got over 1,000 beds that are segregation beds, and that's about what we had back then. So we haven't really decreased the amount of beds or the amount of space that we're using in segregation. It's just that people are doing smaller stints overall in seg, and there's much more cycling in and out of it. Because as long as the facility has those beds, they're going to keep those beds full. So real quick, just to give you kind of an idea of what seg looks like inside, the day in, day out routine, and I mean those words absolutely purely as possible, day in, day out routine, because that's all you've got. Lunch or breakfast is served at about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. Officers load up all the trays that come over from the chow hall. They load them on a cart, and they come around the cell block, and they pass out trays one at a time. If you're not standing at your door up and ready to get your tray, they're going to go right on by. So they come around, they make the round, they pass out the trays. If you got your tray, you're eating, you're fine. If not, you're not going to get a tray later on until lunchtime. So a half an hour later, they'll come back around, they'll pick up everybody's trays. Probably right around that time, once they've got all the trays cleaned up and maybe shipped out of the unit, they'll call yard. So anybody who wants to go out to recreation yard, they've got to be like dressed with their coat on, ready to go, standing at the door when the officers show up at their door. If they're not standing at the door, probably they're not going out to the yard. You're allowed yard for 1 hour a day, 5 times a week. And pretty typically, over the 10 years that I was in there, it was at almost every facility, it was first thing in the morning, right after breakfast. So say 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. What yard is I guess first, any movement out of your cell. If it's the 3 showers a week that Natalie was talking about, or the yard that I'm talking about here, or if you've got to come out of your cell for health care or whatever, before you come out of your cell, you back up to the door with your hands behind your back, and then they open up that little slot in the door, and they stick handcuffs in, and they handcuff you behind your back. And then they tell you to step away from the door. You step away from the door, and then they open the door. They've probably got like a little leash connected to the handcuffs, and they escort you wherever you need to go. So they'll take you in these handcuffs out to the yard cage, which is a little bit bigger than the cell. Yard cage is probably, you're looking at 12 to 15 feet. There's probably a couple rows of them, 8 on each side. They'll take you out there. They'll lock you in the cage. They'll take the handcuffs off you. You've got about an hour. If it's snowing or raining or something like that, then they'll give you longer because they're going to want to wait for the rain to stop before they've got to come out and take people in and out. So, so that's your yard, 5 times a week for an hour a day. Showers, same deal. Be at your door. Be ready. Have your shorts on and your soap in your hand, or you're not going to get your shower. Showers are 7 minutes apiece. You're in a little cage that has a shower head that comes out, and if you take longer than the 7 minutes, and the officer wants to press the rule, he can put you on shower restriction. That means that you're not getting a shower for 30 days at least. There's other things like that, and that's what's kind of interesting to me is there's so much stuff that goes on in SEG, and the department's not at all like private or secretive or like ashamed about it at all. But there's water restriction in your cell where they shut off your water, and every 2 hours an officer will come around. I'm sorry, every half hour an officer will make rounds in segregation, but every 2 hours, if you're on water restriction, they'll ask you, hey, do you need the water turned on? Do you need to flush your toilet? Do you need to get a drink? They're supposed to, right? So that's the rule, and the department has that right in the policy directive. There's yard restriction, as I mentioned. There's shower restriction. There's food loaf, which is a interesting little contraption. So food loaf, I was put on food loaf once, and what this is so they come around, they pass out the trays. You're not allowed to keep anything off your tray. You got your breakfast at like 7:30 in the morning, your lunch at about 11:30, and then you get fed your dinner at 3:30, 4 o'clock. And that's the last meal of the day until breakfast the next day. There's no commissary store in segregation. You're not getting any food other than what's on the tray. And if you keep anything off the tray, after they come around and pick the trays back up, you get put on food loaf. So one time I was up in a facility up in the Upper Peninsula, and like once a month we got this good breakfast tray that had like a cinnamon roll on it. And I was getting a visit that day from my parents, and I was all excited about it, and I was getting ready for the visit like before they came to pick up the trays, and I hadn't eaten the cinnamon roll yet. So I took the cinnamon roll and I wrapped it up and I put it down in my foot locker while I was going out to the visit with my folks. I'd have something to eat when I got back later on. While I was out on the visit, a sergeant came in and shook down my cell and found the cinnamon roll, and he put me on food loaf for it. So what food loaf is everything that they serve on the tray, and it might be like a typical lunch would be like a little, breaded piece of fish, and maybe a scoop of some canned peaches, 2 slices of bread and butter, and maybe like a little spinach, okay? They'll take everything that's on the tray and put it in a blender, and then pour it into a pan and cook it. Yeah, so you get the baked food loaf, right? And they're not bad, I can tell you. If you get one of the ones that's like a breakfast tray that has oatmeal and a cinnamon roll, you can mix that up and it's not that bad. But you get into some of the stuff and it gets pretty funky. So I was on food loaf for keeping that cinnamon roll for 7 days, and I didn't really eat. I had a couple friends who would, if we had like maybe some cold cereal in the morning or something, they'd put it in an envelope and slide it across the hall to me on the floor and send me some food because I know I wasn't eating. So, yeah, there's things like that, and the department talks about it right in their policy directive. So it's strange to me that they're like open and honest about it, and that there's not like a little bit of concern or shame about it. Yeah. I guess that's really about it in SEG. I mean, they're serving you 3 trays a day. You're getting a yard period, an hour a day, 5 times a week, and you got your 3 showers. Visits, you're allowed 4 a month. They're non-contact visits. They last 2 hours. My dad's probably got to take 3 days off work overall. They come up on maybe Friday. They visit me Saturday morning. They've got to rent a hotel. Visit me Saturday morning, stick around to visit me again on Sunday morning or something like that, and then go home. So it's huge, huge burden for parents or family members, friends, whatever, to come up and visit people. Most of the ag-seg space that we've got is up in the Upper Peninsula. Baraga is a maximum security facility. Marquette as well. There's a lot of seg space at Alger. It's just spread out across the UP. So all the guys that we're locking up from Flint and Detroit and Pontiac and Saginaw, they're getting shipped up over the bridge, and they're sitting there in these facilities. And these are young black guys, and they're in facilities that are staffed by all white people. And probably the only interactions that those guards have had with black folk are people who have been in prison. So it's a really ominous sort of setup. That said, I think more than anything, like the thing that got me through all of those 10 years, it's family contact and it's friend contact. So people who have families and friends who will write letters or visit or something like that, that is absolutely what gets you through it.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Crossroad Connection. If you're interested in attending upcoming seminars, check out our website at cbi.tv to find out more and sign up. We hope to see you again right here next week.